Hey everyone, you're listening to the TEN7 Podcast, where we get together every fortnight, and sometimes more often, to talk about technology, business, and the humans in it. I'm your host, Ivan Stegic. My guest today is Megan Glover, who is the marketing manager at Solhem Companies, an environmentally conscious real estate developer here in Minneapolis. She also happens to be a longtime client of ours at TEN7, and we've been working with Solhem for over 10 years and with Megan for over 5. Hey, Megan, welcome. It's so good to have you on the podcast.
It's great to be here, Yvonne. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. It's nice to be talking to you. So I'd like to start with Solhem Companies. I just kind of described it as an environmentally conscious real estate developer. Yeah. I mean, this is one of your founding principles. This is central to what Kurt Gunsbury was thinking when he first started Solhem back in 2008. Tell me about why. Why should this be a focus for a real estate company of all things?
Yeah, good question. I think the simple answer is because it's the right thing to do. And that's kind of what Kurt's ethos has been from day one. If we're doing the right thing, it's going to also be smart from a business standpoint, and it's eventually going to pay off for us. And another way to approach that is that now in 2019, so over 10 years from when Kurt first started the company, it's just kind of expected these days, I think. And I really think that if you're not focusing on sustainability as a company, it's probably something you should revisit.
Yeah, now that you say that, that makes me realize that what Kurt was thinking about and what he was pioneering really in the Twin Cities was like nobody was doing that. And kudos to him for approaching it that way. You're right. It's to be expected now.
Yep, exactly. And I think it's part of our brand very deeply, but it's not even necessarily something we're talking about day in, day out. So it's very interesting to see how that's evolved over the past decade.
So sustainability is one of the values that Solhem stands for. It's part of your brand promise. Yeah. Tell me about the other values that Solhem stands for.
Yeah. So Yvonne, I'm so glad you asked this because this year we actually formalized a document, our official Solhem brand book. And I must say that the process of putting the values down on paper and then distributing them to the team has been really transformational. So here's what we came up with. Our purpose is to build beautiful, sustainable communities that people love. And we do it with kindness, grit, trust, and awareness.
That's amazing.
So I definitely, well, thank you. And, it's something that we've been feeling for a decade now, but it was never actually formalized and written down. And I don't think any of us knew what that would do to all of us, on the leadership team, as well as the rest of the company, just once we were able to actually put that down into words and then present it to the team. It's been a really fun year for us.
That's lovely. It's so nice to hear that you've formalized that and that you've done what you've done and that it's been as transformational as it has. We did this a few years ago, and equally so. Like, you kind of know what the culture is like and what you'd like it to be as a leader, but once you put it down, I mean, there's a line in the sand.
Yep, exactly.
Did you guys work with anyone to do that, or did you do it internally? What was the process like there?
We did it internally. We read a book a few years ago called Traction, which is written by Traction. Okay. And it did kind of inspire us to formalize a lot of processes across our company, and one of them was really starting with what does Solhem mean, and how can we teach someone that we have just hired what Solhem means in a month instead of a couple years. Because when I started, it took me probably a full year before I even really understood what the company was about and how cool it really was. So it kind of was, this is a way for us to actually expedite our training process so that as we're growing, as we're scaling, we're bringing people on, and we need them to be feeling this a lot more quickly than 1 or 2 years.
The thing that I originally struggled with when we first came out with, when we first formalized our values and our mission, was how do I apply them to the day-to-day? How do you oh yeah, it's nice to talk about the fact that you do this work with kindness and grit, but how do you remind everyone, how do you live them on a daily basis? They're probably pretty new to you, and maybe you've been trying to figure it out yourself, but what's your experience been with that?
This is maybe cheesy, but Post-it notes. So I just I literally write these words down, and they're on Post-it notes staring me in the face. And, sometimes I'm looking at them, sometimes I'm not. But I will say that occasionally I'm writing an email and I'm about to send it. And then I get a glance of kindness and I look back at my email and I'm like, ooh, you know
undo,
what? I'm going to sit on
send.
that. Undo, exactly.
Undo.
So yeah, I would say it's still a new process for us, kind of figuring out exactly what that brand book literally does for us day in and day out. But, I think the bigger thing we've learned so far is that it's just had a great effect on team morale. Just made everybody feel a lot prouder about what our company does. And that shows, that trickles down, that becomes clear in their interactions with residents and with contractors and, with our cleaning staff. And it's just, it has a really positive ripple effect, I'd say.
I love it. Okay, so let's talk about the first building that Kurt worked on.
Yeah.
And this is just kind of a nice, neat coincidence that I like to bring up. And I you probably knew this, but Solhem Uptown was built in the neighborhood of Uptown on Holmes Avenue. And when I first saw that, I thought, hold on a second, did Kurt plan this? Because Holmes is an anagram of Solhem. Did he go to Holmes and say, okay, I'm going to call my company Solhem? Or did he look for Holmes because he had already, what is going on? Okay,
I love that you love this so much because honestly, Yvonne, I am pretty sure that nobody knew about the anagram until you brought it up to us however many years ago that was. So no, it was certainly not anything that was in his mind at the time. It is a very happy, fun coincidence though. And yeah, Solhem, the name was actually inspired from Kurt and his wife, Catherine. They're friends in overseas in Sweden who had a beautiful seaside home that they had nicknamed Solhem. And I think Kurt and Kath were just always very inspired by the design and the love and care that they put into that home. And that's where the name came from.
So that was the first one. And then there was another building, Sol 2, which everyone calls Sol 2 because it's an A, but it really has a little O on top of it. And I think that's how you're supposed to say it. And I think that's homage to the fact that it's the second building, because I think 2 means two, right?
2 means two, yeah. But I will say, as far as the pronunciation goes, most of us just called it Sol 2, which is incorrect, right? But everybody else would actually, inquiring potential residents would call it Sol Tiva. So
really,
yeah.
I have not heard that iteration.
Soltiva, yep.
Really,
yeah. So that was, that's just what you're going to get when you kind of name your building something.
When you put a character on a letter somewhere where it's not usually there.
Right, exactly. So yes, that was our second son. So yeah, son, S-U-N. So that was Soltva, and then Solhaven coming along. Maybe a year and a half after that. Haven being a haven, so
haven.
Sun Haven. Yep.
And then you broke from the brand, and this is kind of what I want to talk about. I want to talk about from a marketing perspective. This is really interesting because you started out naming the building after you named the after the company, and then you went with this motif of keeping the son part, the soul part of the name.
Yep.
And then you branched out.
Yep.
But on one hand, you have the values of the company and the vision of your leader, right?
Yep.
And on the other hand, you have the individuality of each building you're putting up and the neighborhood it's in, and being almost customized for that neighborhood.
Right.
So, like, how do you approach that? And how has it evolved over the years?
Yeah. So it is a very interesting nut to crack. And I think I feel like the nut keeps changing on me. Like when I started, it was a peanut, pretty easy. And then now it's kind of like a really annoying nut, which a walnut is that a really
Those
annoying
are annoying
nut to
nuts,
crack?
yes.
Yeah. And this was all coming from Kurt. Kurt was the person that said, you know what? It's time to move on from SOL, soul. We're going to name this building something totally different. And we're just going to keep changing it up from there. And that was really when the same time that I kind of came into my own as the marketing manager. So in some ways, it was just a really big challenge to me to figure out how we keep true to this idea of Solhem, even when we don't have that name recognition. We're still learning, to be quite honest, and we're still figuring that out. I think a big part of it has been our websites. And, you know, you can speak to that. From the very beginning, we kept a very kind of steady design for each of our buildings, so you could see that continuity.
That connection.
Exactly. So just trying to build and cultivate that. And again, it's a work in progress. We're getting better every year with it. And we've certainly, you and I have talked a lot about what the future looks like here. But yeah, I'd say it's a big challenge.
How has your own thinking about marketing for the buildings and for Solhem evolved over the last 5 years? You've been with Solhem for about 5 years now, if I'm not mistaken. And
correct.
I'm curious to hear like what you thought you would be doing in your job to start, what you actually did, and then how has that changed?
Yeah. So when I started, I was much more on the sales front. So I was, boots on the ground, making the deals. And I think that's something that every new hire we have with the company, we want them to be able to lease an apartment. That's the heart and soul of the business is, can you invite someone in? Can you show them around? And can you get them to sign on the dotted line at the end? And so that's kind of what I was doing when I started. And after about 6 months, I was getting a little antsy in that role. And I started kind of just, I think, thinking more big picture about what our marketing efforts could look like in general. And this is, again, we're like a 10, 12 person company at this point. So we don't have departments. We have 12 people, and all 12 people do everything. So I could manage a building. I could, lease it up, clogged toilet. I could lease it up. And so, I think just really kind of developing those departments from the ground up has been how my job has evolved. And in doing so, I kind of ended up just being the marketing guru. It's not something I was formally trained in, but, I just taught myself and learned and read a lot over the years, and it's kind of brought me to where I am right now.
And we'll get to what you originally were trained to do later on in the podcast. I have some questions about that.
Okay. Good, because it's really interesting.
Let's keep those listeners. Stay tuned for what Megan was really trained to do. So, in preparing for the podcast, I was fascinated by the many different pieces of the kind of the what you guys actually do. So I love that we've talked about the company and what the values are and how you function as an organization. I'd like to kind of move the lens a little bit now and talk about what you're actually doing. And you were like, I can't talk about everything we do. I don't know what all those things are. And I was like, Megan, come on. You know much more than what we do and what our listeners do. So I want to ask you, putting up a building is not non-trivial. There are many moving pieces.
Yeah.
What do those broad strokes look like in Kurt's mind? And then how does that trickle down to everyone? And maybe it doesn't trickle down. I don't like that phrase. Maybe it's more collaborative. But Kurt has an idea. Let's put a building up somewhere. You got to find the place. You got to find the property. You got to work with the city. You got to find a developer, a construction general contractor. You have to consider the marketing, the lease up, the operations. Tell me about those stages.
Yeah. So the first stage, and by far the most important, is the location. It's just number one. Yes, there are many empty plots in the city that you could throw up a building on. For us, it is where in the city is special. Where are people going to want to live, or where do they already enjoy living? We try to get ahead of the curve if at all possible. Sometimes it's hard to do that because it's a big risk. But for us, it's location. So that's number one. And then after that, it is negotiate a price, apply for a permit with the city, send that offer letter out to the investor pool, call our architect. And, where we are right now as a company, I would say a lot of this process is pretty set. It's pretty formalized in a way that maybe 5 years ago, each one of these steps was really laborious and a lot of uncertainty. And now it's we have an architect we work with. Our investors they come along with us and they're committed to the company and to our mission. So we're good there. The construction bids, we got a couple people that we like to work with. Let's see who gives us the best price. We know the people that, we need to work with at the city. And so it's become a lot more streamlined over the year. And I think that's a big reason why we've been able to see some big growth this past year in terms of, having 3 buildings in the ground at one time, which is pretty major for us.
So I want to try to go through a little more of the process. So you find the spot, you make the offer, you talk to the investors.
Yeah.
At what point, not at what point, and then you have to get those contractors in to actually start working, right?
Yeah.
Can you give me an idea about how long it takes you to put up, let's say, a recent building that's, I've noticed there's typically 6 stories, and we could talk about that as well, but a recent building, 6 stories high. How long's the first part? How long's the middle part? How long's the end part?
Oh, tough question. I mean, the parts can be a different length depending on who the construction contractor is. Some teams work more quickly. Some teams take a little bit longer, but then the finished product is ready to go. I'd say in general, start to finish, from finding the location from that very day, it's about 12 to 18 months in general. So,
wow.
Yeah.
That's actually really fast when you think about it. I mean, this is a building that you are creating homes for people for more than, I actually don't know, how many apartments in such a building? 150, 100?
Anywhere, our buildings, anywhere we've done from 48 on the small end up to 198, which is going to be our biggest property, and it's opening next year. So
that's a lot of homes for a lot of people.
Yeah,
and 12 to 18 months is not a long time to go from nothing to homes and to people moving in and to operational.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
That's very cool. That's reshaping our city fast, honestly.
Yeah. Yes, it is. And I think, what a good point to call out how fast, we are changing the fabric of the city. And it makes it even more important for us to really have a strong sense of who we are and our values, so that we're not making mistakes, because you make a big mistake when you're moving fast and it can have pretty serious consequences. So we don't take that lightly.
No, I'm so glad that that's the case.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about the challenges you might have in Minnesota from a construction point of view that you might not have, say, in a warmer climate. And I'm asking this specific question because when we were a brick and mortar company and we had an office right outside of where Soltva went up. Yeah. And I remember the middle of January walking back to my car to the parking, snow falling, 10-degree Fahrenheit weather, and you guys are pouring concrete and there are men out there working, and I'm like, that is crazy. How is this even possible?
Yeah.
So tell me about some of the challenges with construction.
Yeah. So, as you know, and other listeners who live up here, Minnesota has a very harsh climate. And of course, our construction crews are prepared for it. So, I ran this topic by the VP of development for our company this morning, who does a lot of our architecture and design work, Jason Lord. And I was like, Jason, what exactly is possible or not possible when it's so cold? And his response was, actually, it's not that hard to build in freezing temps. The hardest part is the earthwork. So when you're actually moving the ground. So for us, as long as the ground isn't frozen, you can basically do anything. One kind of funny thing is that one of our supers, Kevin, he uses a popular construction phrase with his team that, quote, "the heat is in the tools," end quote. So it's hard for the guys. It's hard for the men and women out there because it's so cold. But hey, the heat is in the tools. So
the heat is in the tools. I love it. So I was talking to one of my colleagues, and we were talking about Kurt's success, and we all noticed and so we're surprised by the fact that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think every building that you guys have put up has been 6 stories high. I don't think there have been buildings that have been higher than that.
Yeah.
And my friend said, "Oh, I don't get it. I mean, don't the economies scale once you go higher? Isn't it not if you're going to go to 12 floors, it's not going to be double the cost of being at 6 floors. It's going to be less than double. There's some, and I was like, dude, I don't know. We should really ask Kurt, because this is all conjecture on our part. Yeah. Maybe there's a law or something that says you can't go higher than 6. I don't know.
Yeah.
What's the deal with that?
Okay, so here's the deal. And a very, very minor correction, but we have built up to 8. So that is our highest. Yep, Borealis is actually 8 stories. But in general, in general, we're working with 6 to 8. So 95% of the reason there is economics. And then maybe the other 5% would be zoning ordinances. But for the most part, unless you're building in, a historic neighborhood or a certain residential area, you can build as tall as you want. The thing to keep in mind is that there's a fixed cost as soon as you put that hole in the ground. So when you're considering that, it is actually way more expensive to build taller than it is to build shorter. So maybe you might think that, oh, hey, if you build 20 stories, that would be not that much more expensive than just having built 10. No, it's quite a bit more expensive. So for us, it's just a purely economical reason. We just we're just a little bit too small of a company to be throwing up those big commercial high rises. And so we kind of stick to what we know. And we also keep in mind that we want to maximize density wherever we go. So if we're building a 6 to 8 story building, we take up as much of the plot of land as we can, surface area wise, so that we're able to put in as many units as possible. And I think that's a smart, environmental way to approach it and financial way to approach it.
Okay, now I can go back to him and say, listen, this is how it works. I got it.
Buddy.
Listen, buddy.
Yeah, it's just, it's such a big project and it's so expensive. And you see some people coming into Minneapolis and doing it now in the downtown Northeast area. You're seeing major high rises, but those are big multinational firms that just, they can just afford to do it. They can do that
and afford to do it.
Yep.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. There's been some, I don't know. I've read in the news that one of the trends on the East Coast and the West Coast, and that's come to Minnesota as well, has been this idea of micro apartments. And I know that you guys have built some buildings that are micro apartments. Yeah. Are you seeing that trend continue, or are other people doing micro apartments? And maybe you should give our listeners a definition of what a micro apartment actually is.
Yeah, so we define micro units as 400 square feet or less in general. I think the standard definition is actually 500 square feet or less. But the way we approach it in our building design is typically 400 or less. Now, yes, it is absolutely a trend. And what I think is kind of cool is that our company kind of started that trend in Minneapolis. We built a building in the North Loop, Nolo, which was kind of the first of its kind with the micros. And it leased up incredibly fast and it rarely turned over. So we just saw that, hey, the market is right for this. People want to live more minimally. Maybe it's Marie Kondo's book. Everybody's just like...
Everybody talks about it.
Everybody's talking about it. But
hey, throw it all away.
Absolutely. It's simpler. You can focus on being outside and traveling. And when you come home, you just have a very simple, elegant place to live. And it's also cheaper. We can provide a home for people at a much lower rate than if we were to give them a 700 square foot one bedroom. So, we're still doing obviously all variety of sizes, but we have definitely shifted to the micros a bit more.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. You and I interact, and we're mostly focused on the website, on the marketing, on being the digital marketing team for Solhem. And so that's my lens into how Solhem works. But I'm curious about the rest of kind of your own digital infrastructure and your technology. And I'm wondering about what role technology plays in your organization, in how you function, and by extension, how your buildings function, and how has that changed, and what does technology do for you these days?
Yeah, it's absolutely changed, and it continues to. I'd say technology continues to play a bigger and bigger role every year. A big part of that is the shift to automation. And, it's permanently changed the face of all businesses, and ours is no exception. So we're kind of having to think like, what does automation look like for a company like us? And how can we stay true to who we are while we are kind of adding these certain features that might seem a little bit more impersonal. One example is like virtual leasing. So for instance, how can we offer someone out in Seattle who's moving to Minneapolis a completely seamless experience, 100% remote, where they feel like they know exactly who we are, what they're getting, and they're really, really excited and jazzed to put down a deposit 2,000 miles away. I think there's a big part of automation that comes into that, but at the same time, I think we're even more kind of focused right now on how will we continue to keep it personal? Because as much as technology is super important, and it will always play a large role. We know that having that personal touch is what's really memorable. So we're kind of, I'd say, at a crossroads right now with kind of figuring out the best way to automate and stay true to who we are.
Especially when you, one of your values is that you need to be kind.
Yeah.
And having that personal touch is certainly a way of being kind to potential residents. And once you're a large company, there is a risk of becoming anonymous, and I think that kindness goes out the window when that happens.
Yes, exactly.
So it's definitely a challenge. I have an idea.
Yeah.
What if someone in Seattle who's looking to lease up or is looking for a place to make their home, looking for a lease with you, what if they could put on a virtual reality cardboard box on their phone and they could walk through one of your new apartments with you by their side as you walk through the bedroom and the kitchen and the beautiful windows and look out at the view of something that doesn't even exist yet, or of something that actually does exist.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's where we're headed, Yvonne. And
really?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And we want our friendly face to be a part of it, but I do think that the next generation is just kind of wanting to take care of all this stuff on their phone.
They'll just want to do it on their phone. I love it. Let me know how we can help you, because that sounds really exciting to me. That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll probably be chatting about this. We already chat a lot.
Good.
So yeah, talk to you next week.
All right. So right now you're working on 3 buildings simultaneously, right? That's pretty brave and optimistic and scary at the same time. At least it would be for me.
Yeah.
Tell me about the 3 buildings. Where are they? What's next after them? Give me something about them.
It is. It's scary for me too. So yeah, I actually have a job coach this year that I've been working with, and a few months ago, I remember telling her this is about to get real for me, because my job has always been one building at a time. And basically now I'm going to be doing 3 buildings at the same time in the same amount of hours a week. So just give me some tips on how to get
Good
through
for
that.
you for having a coach. That's the best thing I ever did as well.
Oh my God.
Well, yeah. So does she say delegate?
Oh, yes. It's a Post-it. Yvonne, it's
Is it really? Oh
yeah. I have a delegate Post-it at my workstation. So yes, that
brilliant.
It's been a game changer for me for sure. So the buildings in the ground right now coming up, we have, one in Northeast Minneapolis called the Gibson, 159 unit building. And these are all going to be in the 7 to 8 story range. Another one over in the Mill District, which is a new place for us to be developing. So that's exciting. And that building is actually called Ox Up. Very odd name, but it pays homage to an art gallery that used to be at that location called Ox Up Gallery. And what's kind of fun about that is we worked with that former owner to actually bring an art gallery into our building, so that we'll have 2 separate entrances there, one to the residences and then the other to an actual art gallery. So that's going to be pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we're super excited. And then the last one in the ground is back in the North Loop, our kind of happy place, I'd say. And that one is going to be called the Archive. It's a very large 198 unit building. And I'd say the most interesting kind of design element to this building is that there's going to be an open air promenade that cuts through 2 wings of the building. So we're really going to be encouraging that kind of public interaction with the space, and hopefully having some little boutiques move in there and just add to the character of the neighborhood even more.
So some retail on the first floor.
Yeah.
That sounds cool.
Yep.
And that, if I'm not mistaken, that one's over by the Federal Reserve, right?
It is. Yep. It's a block, or half a block from there. And then on either side of that building, there are two historical structures that will remain untouched. So it'll kind of provide a really neat new old juxtaposition on one single block. So I think it's going to be really beautiful.
And there must be challenges involved in like being able to make sure that what's historic around you remains preserved and solid and I love that there's that attention to detail from Solhem, that's a concern as well. I think, kudos to you guys for that.
Well, thank you.
We are coming to the end of our podcast. We're going to be wrapping it up here pretty soon, but I wanted to talk about what you're actually trained to do compared to what you're doing now. And if I'm not mistaken, you are a classically trained pianist.
Yes,
is that right?
That's right. Yep.
Tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what path you took becoming a pianist and then moving to Minnesota and working at Solhem. Do you still and also do you still play?
I do. So I play mostly for fun, which is a big kind of difference from when you're training to be a concert pianist. I think it's I relate it to basically training for the Olympics, but like all the time, constantly. So every year, you never go to the Olympics and then it's over. You just keep training for the Olympics. For me, it became, I started playing when I was 5. I loved it. I did it because I loved it. I got very serious. I was talented. And I just eventually got to a point in my mid-20s where I was like, you know what? There's more to life. And I don't want to train for the Olympics all the time for the rest of my life. Yeah. But it really gave me so much in terms of just discipline and, opened my eyes to the world of classical music, which is something that I hope everyone can find at some point. And it did ultimately lead me up here in a weird way. To Minnesota because I met my husband when I was in graduate school in southern Indiana, and he ended up taking the leap to move up here for a job, and so I followed him up. And I became friends with someone who lived in one of the Solhem buildings. And she one day, I was kind of like bouncing around teaching piano, but I wasn't really happy with it. And she was like, "Hey, I know this really cool company. I think you should take an interview with them." And I had no idea about property development and management. Yeah. It was a brand new thing for me, but I kind of trusted that the culture seemed like a good fit, and interviewed with Kurt, and that was the beginning of
that was it. Kurt saw the potential and was very smart to offer you a job. So good for him for doing that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yes, and I think for him, he was like, "Oh, concert pianist. Okay, cool. Like she's kind of crazy, but in a good way."
Well, I'm glad it's worked out. It's worked out really well, hasn't it?
It sure has.
Well, thank you for spending your time with me today. Thanks for talking about Solhem and the values and what you guys stand for, and taking me through the kind of the process of putting a building up, and also through that little path through being a concert pianist as well. It's been really awesome talking with you today.
Yeah, it's been a great chat. Thanks so much, Yvonne.
Megan Glover is the marketing manager and former concert pianist at Solhem Companies, and you can find them online at solhem.com. You've been listening to the TEN7 Podcast. Find us online at ten7.com/podcast. And if you have a second, do send us a message. We love hearing from you. Our email address is podcast@ten7.com. Until next time, this is Ivan Stegic. Thank you for listening.